Good morning, watch nerds. I haven't done a head-to-head review for a while, not because I don't enjoy doing them, but they take twice as long as a straightforward review, and only half as many people watch them. Today I'll be comparing two watches that are similar in many ways, and therefore I expect this head-to-head to be extremely close. The two watches are the Seiko Alpinist 1959 and the Hamilton Murph 38. They'll be compared on the following, given a mark out of 10. Brand, movement and crown, case and crystal, bracelet and clasp, dial and handset, versatility, presentation and packaging, the X factor, value for money, and this will be the first of two double pointers. Finally, wearability. The wearability score will also be double because I think it's the single most important aspect of any watch. And welcome to my head-to-head review between the Hamilton Murph and the Seiko Alpinist 1959. Before we start, let's have a look at the dimensions. Now, the Seiko has a case size of 38.5mm, a lug width of 19mm, a depth of 13mm and a lug to lug of 46mm. Now, once adjusted to fit my 17cm wrist, it weighs in at 134 grams. The Murph is slightly smaller at 38mm. The lug width is 20mm, the depth is 11mm, and the lug to lug is 45mm. The weight's around about 121 grams. Now, although the measurements are extremely close, the Hamilton definitely wears smaller. Firstly, the brand. Now, if you live in the USA, I suspect as many people are aware of Hamilton as they are Seiko. In the UK, it's quite different. Of course, any watch enthusiast is indeed familiar with Hamilton, but in most cases, the majority of the public aren't. Hamilton have been a Swiss brand since 1974, so that carries a bit more kudos than Seiko, which is Japanese. As well as Seiko making some pretty high-end watches, have also made their fair share of cheap and cheerful watches, whereas the Hamilton starting price is somewhat higher. I believe the international appeal for Seiko is a bit higher, so Seiko get a 9 out of 10 and Hamilton a 7. Inside the Alpinist is the 6R35, which is an adequate movement with an impressive power reserve of 70 hours. However, from experience, I have found that the regulation on arrival can be a bit hit and miss, and the positional variance is no better than the NH35. They are, however, very reliable and can be regulated quite easily. Inside the hammy is the H10 movement, which in essence is the Powermatic 80, which is a modified ETA 2824, which has been slowed down to give it 80 hours of power reserve. Having owned a few watches with this movement inside, I have found them to be more accurate than the 6R35, but that's just as well because an enthusiast or even an average watchmaker can't actually regulate one of these. I genuinely believe the H10 is a step up to the 6R35, and it's going to get an extra point. The Murph gets an 8 out of 10 and the Alpinist a 7. Now the case and crystal. Now the Seiko has a single dome sapphire crystal with AR coating, whilst the Hemi has a double dome sapphire. Now this is totally subjective because some people like the distortion of the single dome crystal and others like the clarity of the double dome crystal. I'm in the former and I like the distortion. The finish on both cases is excellent, although the chamfering on the Seiko offers a little bit more detail. I certainly favour the slimmer case of the Hamilton, but there's a good reason for that. This is swings and roundabouts, so both are getting the same scores, and they both come out with 9 apiece. They both got oyster style bracelets. Both have got solid end links, although neither fit perfectly to the lugs, but the Murph does have quick release spring bars and the Alpinist doesn't. I would say though that the Seiko bracelet is a little bit more detailed and it feels more substantial, and as well as that it's got a pin and collar system, and that's compared to Hamilton's primitive cotter pins. The clasp on the Seiko is half milled and half pressed, and it's only got 2 micro adjustments. To be honest, it's the weakest part of the watch. The Murph's clasp is fully milled and it's got 3 micro adjustments. I would have liked to have seen an on-the-fly clasp on both watches, but the Hemi's clasp is far superior. So I think the bracelet is better on the Seiko and the clasp is better on the Hamilton, which means they both get the same score, and that's a 7 out of 10. This is where things get really complicated, because it's just so damn subjective. The Murph without doubt has a simpler dial, as it's all painted and it's got no texturing. The Seiko on the other hand has applied indices and its dark blue dial was nicely textured. Now we're getting to the X Factor category in a while, so I must be careful not to cross over. I love the font of the indices on the Hemi, and I love the polished applied indices on the Seiko. I love the Dauphine hands on the Seiko, but I also love the cathedral hands of the Murph. Now I think depending on the mood I'm in, may depend on the dial I prefer. However, I do think there's a little bit more to the Seiko, so it's getting an extra point. The Alpinist gets a 9 out of 10, and the Murph an 8. So when it comes to versatility, what am I looking at? Well, I suppose it comes down to how waterproof it is, and what's the loom like. I believe the Murph is a bit more dressy and dare I say subtle, whereas the Alpinist is a bit more utilitarian. Now the Seiko's got 200 metres of water resistance compared to the Hemi's 100, and as you may expect the loom on the Seiko is far better. For the better loom and water resistance, the Seiko is getting 2 extra points, so the Seiko gets a 9 out of 10 against the Hamilton 7. Okay, I get the argument, you don't wear the box. However, receiving the watch and opening the packaging is all part of the experience. Now, as nice as the Seiko is, its rather plain cardboard box with a cheap cushion inside isn't fitting of a watch that costs as much as this one does. The Hamilton's box is far better, although it doesn't actually blow anybody's socks off. This one's quite easy really. The Murph gets a 6 out of 10, whilst the Alpinist only gets a 4. Now this is always a hard one, especially when it's difficult to determine exactly what the X Factor actually is. Tell somebody who's keen on watches that you've got an Alpinist and they say, oh, that's nice. Tell somebody you've got a Murph and their eyes light up. That said, I believe the Alpinist has got more wrist presence and it's certainly got more bling. When I open my watch box, it's the Seiko that always catches my eye first, so it's going to get an extra point. The Seiko Alpinist 1959 gets a 9 and the Hamilton Murph an 8. I'm starting to wish I hadn't embarked on this project now, because most categories are so damn close. That said, I think I know what the winner is here. Although the movement on the Seiko isn't as good, I think the bracelet is better, even though the clasp is pants of course. It's got more water resistance, a screw down crown and a better loom. What's more, if I bought it new it's £200 less than the Murph. On the flip side, I think the Hamilton is more likely to retain its value, which means a fair bit. After a fair bit of thought, I'm giving the Alpinist an extra point, which means it gets an 8 out of 10 against the Hemi's 7. However, these scores are doubled. Don't forget, this is a double pointer. At last, a really easy one. I believe the Seiko should have been made with 100 metres of water resistance, and that means it could have been a few millimetres thinner. I would also say that the lack of micro adjustments may make it hard for some people to get good fit. As a daily wearer, the Hamilton Murph is a far better watch, as it fits snugly to the wrist and you barely know you're even wearing it. If the Hammy had an on-the-fly adjustable clasp, you'd probably get it a 10 out of 10, but it's still getting a 9. The Seiko isn't bad, but it falls short of the Murph and it gets a 7. Once again though, these scores are doubled. I knew this would be close and I'm not wrong. The Seiko Alpinist 9259 ends up with a score of 93 out of a possible 120, and the Hamilton Murph 38 gets a 92. I think if I were to use one as a field watch, it would probably be the Seiko, but as a day-to-day watch, it would be the Hamilton, and that's based on its wearability. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I've got to say though, if I had to keep one, it would probably be the Hamilton. That brings me to the end of this head-to-head review, so if you've enjoyed it, please click on the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. As mentioned, leave your comments below, and enjoy the rest of your day.